A former villain returns to help the heroes, a secret technique for reviving those who have died is teased, and Sukuna's true power clashes with big wee energy, so let's get into it. The right place. Drop a like and subscribe right now to join the International Gojo Copers Association today. Now back to your regular programming. In the last chapter, everyone was glazing Kusakabe as the strongest grade 1 sorcerer and someone who is extremely resourceful with a lot of tricks up his. Sukuna already defeated the big dogs like Gojo and Yuta. We saw that in the previous chapter, Sukuna also managed to defeat Maki, at least for the time being, by smashing her with a massive black flash. Now, Maki's status was not confirmed yet, and she will likely come back to this fight. She's probably just injured and down temporarily. But in the meantime, Kusakabe is the one who has to engage Sukuna in a dangerous 1v1 showdown. Kusakabe wasn't even sure what he was doing there, and why he was about to fight the strongest sorcerer in history. But he also wasn't about to back down, not when the fate of all of Japan and the entire world is at stake. The latest chapter begins with Kusakabe pulling out one of those tricks from his sleeve, and in particular, he uses new Shadow style simple domain Evening Moon Drawing. Sukuna recognizes this technique, but he isn't sure why Kusakabe would be using a sword drawing technique against him at a moment like this, especially since his cursed energy allows him to unleash flying slashes at his opponent. So that means Sukuna can hit him from afar without even stepping within the range of the sword's attacks, and epic samurai Iaido moves. We get to see some of his inner thoughts. Now, of course, Simple Domain doesn't actually neutralize the curse technique itself, but it's important to remember that even though it is simple Domain can be customized using various rules and binding vows, and this means that a Simple Domain doesn't have to just be a last-ditch defense against domain expansion. It can also be used offensively, and Kusakabe is especially skilled in the new Shadow style, which allows him to use incredible swordsmanship techniques to attack his enemies with his katana. Kusakabe decided to use the Simple Domain now because within the range of this domain, his cursed energy output will be amplified while Sukuna's gets weaker. On top of that, Kusakabe can implement a fully automated system that allows him to instantly attack anyone who enters his domain. Sukuna launches some slashing attacks at Kusakabe, but he blocks them immediately with his katana, which prompts even Sukuna to compliment Kusakabe's excellent reflexes. Kusakabe has the ability to anticipate Sukuna's slashes and block them by reading the subtle sparks of his cursed energy that are produced when the slashes are launched. He can also read even the subtlest physical movements that Sukuna makes right before he attacks, and he combines this with his own natural intuition in order to anticipate and block even Sukuna's overpowered and incredibly fast slashes. All of these abilities are strengthened by Kusakabe's Simple Domain, and that is why he decided to activate it in this moment, even though Sukuna isn't even using his own domain against him. However, because Gege loves to mess with us, just when it seemed like Kusakabe was getting the hang of blocking Sukuna's attacks, he is nearly cut to pieces with another set of slashes. He literally just barely manages to escape with his life. In that moment, Kusakabe realizes that Sukuna has the ability to activate his curse technique without making any movements whatsoever, which means that trying to read Sukuna's body motions right before he attacks is no it up until this point. But now that Kusakabe thought that he was actually making some progress, Sukuna decided to show him just how wrong he was. We then get another quick flashback in which several top-tier sorcerers talk about how awesome Kusakabe is. Nanami refers to him as a master swordsman who can make expert use of many different techniques. Meimei praises him for being super useful and for being able to adapt to any situation, and Gojo compliments his unique Simple Domain as an excellent secret weapon. Less skilled sorcerers need to create binding vows in order to use Simple Domain. Like for example, Miwa needs to have both of her feet planted on the ground or else her Simple Domain is deactivated. But Kusakabe doesn't need binding vows, and the range of his Simple Domain is also unusually large. And speaking of that range, Kusakabe senses by the behavior of Sukuna's cursed energy that he is about to use the world-cutting slash, the same slash that supposedly killed Gojo. So before this happens, Kusakabe expands the range of his Simple Domain. This surprises the King of Curses because Kusakabe's strategy is unique. Normally, when someone relies on swordsmanship techniques, they try to lure their opponents into their Simple Domain. But Kusakabe has the ability to just suddenly expand the range, which catches his opponents by surprise. Now that Sukuna is within the range of the into Sukuna with a massive barrage of sword slashes. Some of these slashes are clearly hitting, because we see Sukuna getting cut and we see blood gushing from the cuts. Kusakabe attacks Sukuna so many times and so vicious, Kusakabe just throws his coat at Sukuna as a quick distraction and then starts punching and kicking Sukuna in an epic round of 1v1 hand-to-hand combat. At one point, Kusakabe actually kicks Sukuna away from him, then runs after him and immediately starts attacking again. Even Kusakabe himself doesn't know why he is trying so hard in this fight against the King of Curses. This isn't like him, risking his life and going all out against an opponent that is clearly stronger and has every advantage. Kusakabe believes that his motivation is coming from the fact that he feels indebted to the late Principal Yaga. As you might recall, Yaga did a huge favor for Kusakabe's sister when he placed her deceased child's soul into a cursed corpse, which was a forbidden act, but an act that helped her cope with the tragedy. With their lives on the line in the fight against Sukuna, Kusakabe feels that he must do his best and go all out, no matter what happens. Kusakabe then does an epic jump that kind of makes him look like Gojo back when Gojo had his I alone am the honored one moment. And then he uses a technique called Hazy Moon to repair the blade of his broken sword with cursed energy. Unfortunately, as Kusakabe tries to attack Sukuna with the new blade, Sukuna smiles and stops the blade by grabbing it between two of his fingers. Sukuna says that he knew Kusakabe would be aiming for his heart because he has already suffered serious damage there, and because of that, Sukuna was able to anticipate the movements and grab the sword. Kusakabe grins at that, and it almost seems like he might have another trick up his sleeve, but then in true Gege fashion, the very next panel shows Kusakabe lying motionless on the ground, Shoko, as he's been doing with every fallen fighter, including Gojo and Yuta. But this is exactly what Sukuna has been waiting for, and as Ui appears, Sukuna suddenly appears behind him and says, "You are starting to..." Looks up and sees that Ui has been saved by Miguel, a Jujutsu sorcerer who was once a follower of Geto, but was later forcibly recruited by Gojo to train Yuta. If you need a reminder, Miguel is